It is Thursday, 1 week before Turkey Day in North America, and a lot of movies out there are real turkeys, but the one that we are going to review today turned out to be an astonishing expose of A Course in Miracles thinking that is somehow embedded in the shared consciousness here on this planet and scattered across multiple galaxies. So we'll be looking at Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2. And this is one of those movies where you really have to go and watch the first episode to really get all the nuances and get filled in on what's going on. But when you get to the second volume, the second edition, oh my God, it is just astonishing how this movie incorporates 90% of its content from A Course in Miracles philosophy and ideology and imagery. So anyway, we've got Devan and Barret in the video chat room. How are you guys doing this morning?
I am doing good.
Woohoo! That really was a great movie, and yeah, I'm glad we picked it because it has a lot of great themes, and it's hilarious. It's probably one of my favorite superhero action movies of all time. So yeah, there's a lot of great themes, and I'm looking forward to going into all of them, definitely.
I did very much enjoy it. I forget that I need to talk on these things. Okay.
Yeah. So it's all about that mental projection. Is that what you're implying, Devan? Don't have to talk, you can just think.
Yeah, I've been talking through you guys. So.
Yeah, project thoughts into our mind, and we'll just talk. You'll sit there looking pretty over there.
Yeah, your mind.
The collective mind.
It is definitely one of my favorite out of these movies. However, I did just happen to see the new Thor movie this week, and
that's good.
It is amazing. It was so funny, and it was just awesome. It blew me away.
Yeah,
maybe I was just in the right mood or something, but it was good.
The family went and saw it. I haven't seen it yet because, if I'm going to spend $15 for a seat in a theater, I would rather turn around and spend like $12 for a DVD and be able to watch the movie in my underwear in the comfort of my home.
Tuesday over here, $5 Tuesday.
Yes, I've got 10,000 movies here, and I continue to add to my collection. But they were saying the new Thor movie really moved Marvel into that realm of sci-fi comedy. It's no longer sci-fi adventure. There are a lot of tongue-in-cheek one-liners and things like that, and that's what we have in this movie too. There's a lot of dialogue that is really hilarious if you're paying attention. If you're watching it in halfway awake mode, it is a good one. But it starts off with all of the different adventurers who are this team, the Guardians of the Galaxy, trying to protect batteries. And that in itself is kind of an interesting idea, storage of energy. So the sacred batteries that are being attacked on this one planet where people imagine themselves to be perfect is the opening scene. And it sets us off on quite a romp that goes directly to the idea of the ego.
Yeah.
It's not quite the opening scene yet, though, but it actually opened with the ego and his girlfriend, and he was showing them the planet, that growing plant stuff. But yes, the big opening scene, I absolutely loved it, with Groot jumping around. And to me, it's so funny about perception is like he's in this small world. He notices the bug, and he's like fighting and eating the bug. but he doesn't notice this big old guy, this big old monster, and the people fighting him. It's like a matter of perception of dimensions. He's aware of the small stuff and just having a good time, and then there's this huge war fight thing going on. It's humorous. I love him dancing around. It's great.
Yeah, I mean that's a great metaphor for all of our lives, right? We're always so focused on all the things right in front of us, we sometimes don't even see the really big picture. And I think that's one of the things that we get as we work with the course, is we realize everything you've ever been focused on has actually been like minutia, and the big things you're totally oblivious to. And so we're I mean, in the movie, Groot was still pretty happy running around and doing his thing, but a lot of times we're focused on our minutia and we're not so happy. And I think that's a really great point, that maybe we should try to expand our horizons and see what's going on around us, see the bigger picture, because again, when we look at the bigger picture, what we really see is the love of God. And we realize all the little things that we're so worried about don't actually mean a whole lot. I sometimes have this experience where I'm looking down at the ants on an anthill, and I'll think, man, that ant thinks what it's doing is so important. And I'm like, well, that's how I feel about my life too.
Yeah, so that is a sad reality of all of our travail in the material world. But this movie brought in a couple of very well-known stars that they kind of dragged out of mothballs for inclusion in the movie. The first one being Kurt Russell, who took on the role of Ego. And I've also liked Kurt Russell, but I feel like there is an added dimension of maturation in this movie. He really comes across as so much more mature than he did in previous movies that I've watched. And then Sylvester Stallone, who is a fellow that I've never really been into the Rocky thing, and so Sylvester was just kind of background personalities in my world. But he really shines in this movie. He's not got a huge amount of effect on it, but whenever he does show up in the movie, it's pretty impressive. He brings an added dimension to it that I really enjoy.
Yeah, good old Sly Stallone. Yeah, he always throws a few unexpected punches in, and I think I agree with you that there were some in this movie. Yeah, and I agree. Kurt Russell had a very different style than he has in most of the movies, and obviously, as we mentioned a little bit, Kurt Russell is the embodiment of the ego in this movie. He starts off, and it seems pretty good, right? There's a love story, everyone's happy. Oh yeah, it's revealed as the movie goes on that he's the father of the main character, Chris Pratt's character, and it's like, oh yay, you found your dad. But then there's this feeling like something's off, and even though it's all kind of beautiful, as we get introduced more and more to the ego's world, there's this sort of uncertainty throughout the whole experience of like, well, what's really going on? Something's not right here. And as the movie goes on, that gets validated. But I think it's a great parallel to all of us in this world where we think this world is really happening. Ding. We think this world is really happening, but something feels a little off, right? Something doesn't seem quite right, but we're not sure exactly what it is, and we can't maybe totally put our finger on it. But if we follow it, if we follow our instincts, we're going to see that, oh yeah, hey, this world is not what it seems, and we really need to look at what it really is all about. So a lot of really cool themes around all that.
Well, the universe seems to agree with you with all these sounds it's trying to speak.
Yes, that was an interesting punctuation there. The thing I found very interesting was that in this movie, we had another big luminary who is actually supposedly the Hollywood star that made the most money last year and one of the richest people in Hollywood. and that is Vin Diesel, who plays Baby Groot. He plays the voice. And so it was kind of interesting watching all of these different luminaries line up to appear in this. And I think they were probably attracted to it because the story itself is very compelling. The story is quite amazing in that it rips apart the illusion of ego. And there's actually even one scene where they're discussing reality, and the statement is made that, you know, the material world, the world that you are experiencing, is an illusion. So there was a lot of profound imagery and ideas that went into this movie, and I think it's really kind of amazing how perfectly it fell together. And doing research, it doesn't appear that the guy who wrote both episodes, Guardians 1 and Guardians 2, really, you know, is that immersed in this identity of spirituality. But boy, did he ever become a vehicle for higher consciousness to illuminate everybody who went to see this movie.
I am Groot.
Vin Diesel got paid a lot of money to say "I am Groot" over and over again.
That's basically it. So that's furthering the obvious, which is that he has a very solid sense of prosperity and deservingness, and he managed to get himself wedged into that situation where he didn't really have to do a lot of memorization of a script.
I love how you see these intellectual dynamics of their perspectives between the characters, and how they all see the world so much differently. Well, the universe, I guess. And even when that, what's the guy with, well, he's sitting there with, oh geez, not good at names. The sitting there with that girl saying how ugly she is. It's like, oh, you're hideous, you know. It's a hilarious scene because it really emphasizes this perception, you know, about it. I don't know if he was completely just trying to put her off, as he kind of states later on, but as well as, I mean, just, you know, just their different perspectives, and the raccoon and everything. They have completely different ideas of what's going on and what's necessary, you know, and they bring different variations to that group. It's just very humorous how it all works together, that they're still very much different people, and so it's kind of showing how it just is so much different in this guy's world. How he sees everybody in his culture was what we would consider ugly, you know, and most people would consider her kind of beautiful in some ways. And he's sitting there, you know, projecting his culture, his ways onto her, saying, of course, yeah, you're hideous, you're absolutely disgusting. And I love how she's so innocent. She's like, yeah, you know, I'm ugly, I'm happy to be ugly. Having no idea what she's talking about. And it's beautiful to see that those forms of perspectives kind of coming out, showing that everybody sees this world differently, and involving that, getting into the depths of that ego idea, which I think the name itself is a hint.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as he jumps out and says, yeah, my name is Ego, it, like, first thing is, oh, is this guy a bad guy? But then you're kind of like, well, maybe they're going to mix it up. Maybe he's not really a bad guy. But then, yeah, we come to see he really is the embodiment of the ego. And, you know, to the point where he's made up a whole planet. He's made up a whole world that is what he is. But what is it? It's all based on death, right? It's all based on domination. It's all based on power over, consuming other planets basically and other beings in order to come into existence. So it's the opposite of true love. It's basically domination, and that's what the ego is based on. It's thought of separation in one versus another. So as we've been talking, it's like, this is amazing. What a clear example of spiritual truths, basically in the form of a superhero action movie.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and I think it's really interesting that ego has the only friend or only pet is an empath that can manipulate emotions. You know, it's like, yeah, ego's intellectual and a big brain and can, with the help of the only one that he allows on its planet is someone that can manipulate emotions of other people and of himself and all this stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. The interesting thing I found was that the music that Marvel uses for this, both of these movies, is a flashback to the 70s and 80s, and when they arrive on planet Ego, when Ego takes the Chris Pratt and Zoe to his home planet, his place of living, as they emerge from the spaceship, the background music is George Harrison's "My Sweet Lord." So you're seeing the ego's litany about "I am God," that need to replace God with that personal self. And then he gives a breakdown of how everything came together. He was a mind that was adrift in space by itself. And over millions of years, he pulls himself together, creates a human form, creates a planet to inhabit. So it's just, it is pure A Course in Miracles. I mean, it just is almost like, page for page, a story written about the Course in Miracles and how the ego came into being, and how once it was brought into inception, it developed this huge amount of need to consume everyone and everything around it. So it is an amazing journey and a very revelatory journey. And now I'm wondering what's going to happen with Guardians of the Galaxy #3.
Yeah, well, I liked how in that scene, that sort of area you were talking about, Chris Pratt's character says, "So wait, are you like God? And ego says, well, I'm a small g God, not a big G God." So he even uses these kind of ideas in the Course about, like, the small g God is the God of the idols, right? All the different idols, and the ego God, of course, is seemingly all powerful within this physical universe, but it's all powerful again for the purposes of domination, for the purposes of separation, for the purposes of one versus another. And what is the whole goal ultimately of the ego's character? Well, it's consuming every other planet and basically destroying the life that's there so that it can feed off of it. Well, it doesn't sound so loving, it doesn't sound so kind, but it's just a great symbol that the ego is a seeming God, but it's actually a false God. And similarly, we come to see that in this movie that Kurt Russell's character was a false God too, and ultimately, had to be undone. And that's a beautiful kind of message too, because how do they have to undo him? They have to go to the core, right? Well, as you said, the ego started off as a mind floating in space, and then it created all this form around it. Well, what do they have to go back to? They have to go back to the mind. Now, obviously, it's represented as a brain in the movie, but that's basically the same journey that we have to go back on. We have to go back to the core of what the ego is and undo it at its source. So it's just so many good metaphors here.
Yeah. As much as I completely agree with how this is all working out. At the same time, I'm seeing this other thing happening where I can completely relate to this ego guy in a different fashion. So much as he's like, you need to change the way you process the world. You're an eternal being. You're not, and everything else is temporary, and everything will pass, and everyone will pass. And even though he goes into this kind of a lack of respect for humanity, kind of an idea, where it goes out of control with power, and where I would not agree with. But in the same sense, the perspective, if we came from that perspective on a daily basis of recognizing that we are just looking at an anthill, and this eternal perspective that we've been for years, in the category of years, we've been around for billions and trillions of years already, and we're going to be around for billions and trillions of years in the future as in time ideas. But just to recognize that, this tiny little thing that we think is so important right now, it has a whole different meaning, a whole different purpose to it than we can really grasp. And as far as when it comes into the body perspective, yeah, it doesn't make sense to people are dying and he put a tumor in his mother's head and all this stuff, and it doesn't make sense to the body perspective, which is interesting how he was in this eternal perspective, and then he says, it hurt me to put that tumor in your mother's head, and then smack back into the perspective of bodies, and he's like, what? Shooting them up and everything. And it's really interesting that you can do such a thing, and be in this complete perspective of recognizing what this eternity is all about. And so as far as the movie trying to describe what that's like, and symbolism, the way he's going about it, trying to assimilate every planet and all the worlds and everything, to become him, as far as what I see it, is more of the actual consciousness and the goal of what it's actually to recognize everything as him. So it's, even though it's put off as a bad idea in this, let's take it with the perspective of there's no good or bad or evil or anything. And it's not about putting seeds on planets that take over the planet. It doesn't actually change anyone in the culture. It doesn't actually kill anyone or anything, but to recognize them all as you, as this celestial, instead of thinking you're among and alone between all of these things that are temporary, separate from you, to actually expand your perspective from this, recognizing, oh, they are me. Oh, they are a reflection of me. Oh, I'm not just growing in this one spot, this little planet I call Devan. I'm actually every single planet, and it's not so much Devan either. It's more of a, recognizing a level in which it is beyond me, beyond the floating consciousness in space. So just to take it a little different of a spin perspective on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing I liked was that there are, multiple stories going on in the midst of this. And if we go back and look at the first Galaxy movie, we are introduced to, what was his name, Yondu, the blue guy who basically raised Pratt as abducted him as a small child and raised him with a group of buccaneers and vagabonds, and so Chris Pratt has this this gaping wound about not having a father, but Yondu has been his surrogate father, and Pratt, unfortunately, at one point rebels and breaks away from Yondu, and they've got their own dynamic going on. But as it turns out, by the end of the second movie, Yondu is the one who has been protecting uh, the character that Pratt plays, and really trying to shelter him and keep him away from this very harsh reality that his true father is something heinous and hideous. So it's interesting because you see a lot of different threads going on there of personal experiences in the material world. Who is our true father? And the ego is always immediate in stepping up to that role and taking on that role. And yet the true father is the one who is helping us to escape or to awaken to the sense of an ego that ultimately wants to consume us and kill us, imagining that it can continue to live by itself. So, and then we see another interesting drama with Zoe's character, in that she and her sister, who have been at odds for what seems like an eternity, by the end of the movie, there's a reconciliation there where the two of them bury the hatchet, come together and embrace in a state of love. So there's a lot of ideas expressed in this movie about the concept of healing and what true healing is. It's not healing of physical circumstances or of bodies, all of that stuff. The true level of healing is, as the Course tells us, where an ancient hatred has become a present love, a present state of love. Mm-hmm. And that really is, pushed forward in a lot of the scenes in this movie. We see the raccoon character and Yondu, the blue guy, have a face-off. And there's this recognition that, we are the same person. We are different aspects, but we are the same person. So there was a lot of ideas here that are Course in Miracles concepts that are beautifully illuminated. And I think that people who have even a peripheral interest in the Course in Miracles should see this movie, because it makes a lot of things a lot more clear. It clarifies things and gets rid of those ambiguous zones that we, when we can see it being acted out on the stage, then it becomes a lot more real for us, I think.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Amazing. And it's, as you're speaking about it, I was realizing, yeah, that's pretty amazing how these little wars that were going on between people, when they came together, they went to the core, they destroyed the ego, right? And now they come out and they're all kind of coming together, finding love between each other and recognizing, that ancient love, even as him with the representing the father for his life, he even says, when we've been looking for something our whole life, turns out that it's always been right in front of our face. When he was about at the funeral thing. And another interesting thing about Groot, when he has to hit the button, the raccoon guy, forget names, and how keeps telling him, no, you hit this button. And at the very end, when it finally became important, he recognized he kept making the same decision over and over again about hitting the wrong button. I'm Groot. I'm Groot. I am Groot. No. And he was about to do it, and it kind of dawned on him, and I related to this a lot, because in my spiritual path, I felt like I would make, in world, I'd make a lot of stupid decisions over and over and over again, and it took a sense of consciousness, recognition of awareness, to finally realize, wow, I don't want to be stupid anymore. I want to just, move my finger over and actually just do it how I want to do it instead of trying to do it right or wrong. And it's funny how it fits into, it just fits into being perfect. And I just related to that a lot, just to see that kind of glimmer in Groot there. Oh, let's just do it right instead of worry about doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many kind of like redemption stories, and about how we shift through the conflict and then we find the harmony. It's always like when we find the peace within, the peace without will follow. It doesn't mean the outer is always going to look great, the form is always going to be perfect, but in the movie it kind of symbolizes that, right? They've done the inner work, so something is changing. And with Yandu, where Chris realizes he actually had his back the whole time, even if he wasn't the great father figure, that he was kind of doing the best that he could. And yeah, so I think that all of these different things symbolize that and help us to know that we're really coming back into our own inner sense of harmony and well-being. And this is just a process we're going through. That there's I think it might be an old Sufi poem that says, though you've broken your vow 10,000 times, come yet again, come. Basically, no matter how many times we turn away, however many times we choose the wrong button, we keep blowing ourselves up over and over again. In the end, we always turn back to God. We always turn back to the truth. We always turn back to love. So just like how all these movies, they go through all these tension, all these challenges, and then they sort of all come to happy ending. Well, our story also will do that. No matter how many challenges, how many diversions, how many dead ends we walk down, and the very end of the story, we choose love. That's the end. Spoiler alert. I'm telling you the end of your movie.
Dang it. Well, I'm freaking Mary Poppins, y'all.
Yes, that's interesting that Yondu has that southern, not hillbilly, but that southern kind of presence. It's interesting how even though these people are off-worlders and not from planet Earth, they have these little idiosyncrasies that are very Earth-like. And that makes it kind of fun because it expands our capacity to imagine universality. Basically that Texas twang could show up on a planet on the far side of the universe and be perfectly normal. So there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek stuff going on in this movie. And one of the scenes I got a real kick out of was when when Yondu is off on the rescue mission to rescue the young man from the ego's clutches. They go through 700 shifts or dimensional shifts in projecting themselves there. And in the midst of all this, they hit one place, and we see Stan Lee at the ripe old age of, 94 or 95, sitting there in a spacesuit, and he's a postman. Well, he's shown up in that role in other Marvel Studios movies. In the Captain America, he was a postman, and one or two others, he was a postman. In others, he was a bartender. But I also am kind of thrilled when Stan makes his appearance in all of these movies, because as we, I'm 71, and I can appreciate the idea of arriving at 94 or 95 and being as active and as plucky a person as he is. That whole idea of age is not a disability, it is a triumph. And so that is reinforced in the movie. I think that we really have to envision ourselves as being ageless and timeless. And that's part of escaping the clutches of the ego, is to keep doing stuff, to keep moving forward, to keep getting up every day and working on, releasing our attachment to the ego and our attachment to the body, and to be fully alive and to be out there moving around and engaged in life. And so Marvel movies, you see Stan Lee as a kind of an icon that pops up throughout all of these different movies, where he is telling us that, you know, you don't have to be limited by age and body condition. You can transcend that, and you can get out there and be creative and become a testimonial for the true timeless nature of who we are. We as spiritual beings are not limited by the physical experiences of this world.
I saw at the very end, I don't know if you noticed in the credits, there was like 5 different little film things that popped back up. And one of them was with Stan Lee with the people he was talking to was walking away, and he's like, "Hey guys, hey, no, I'm not done. I got a lot more stories here." It's funny.
Yes. And that's a perfect example of that. He does have a lot more stories, I think, for us. So hopefully at 110, he'll still be in the studio making his contributions to the Marvel movies that are so entertaining for us.
I was thinking how there should be a superhero that's elderly, and you know, his cover is being in a wheelchair and in a nursing home, and then he pops out of it, and I think Stan Lee would be perfect for that. He's flying around being super strong, lifting up buildings as well, you know, but nobody suspects the guy in the wheelchair. But I wanted to bring up the whole idea, you know, the batteries they were protecting and who those people were, and the whole image of them. As much as our perspective, I'm sure everybody would agree with me that being all gold is a little weird. But they've definitely, they were saying how they design every last little bit of everyone that joins in the community, and everyone agrees on how and what this person that they're going to bring into their community is for, and helps in designing that. And it's really interesting idea that how they say everyone has a perfect place and is fits in just right in, and you get this whole idea of what somebody would say is perfection. It reminds me of a book when I was younger, when the whole idea of perfection came up in my mind, and people would, well, if you're perfect, you know, you'd all be sitting in the same position, looking exactly the same, being the same, not doing anything because you're likely to do something that's not perfect. And it's interesting idea to think if we were to play around with genetics or anything, or even had a God that did make bodies perfect, it's like, why has it stopped in the position that it is? You know, why are we where we are, and not this glowing gold type being? But just to think of that, it brings up stuff, brings up subjects. You know, it's like, would we really want to be like that? Is that really perfect? Is that really this idea of perfection? And then to see how they fight and having this big problems with each other still, it's like their ideas of perfection was completely about aesthetics and not about peace or anything like that, which has been really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they play the perfect foil, right? Because they're trying to be perfect, but they're obviously so imperfect, and they're judgmental and fighting and warring. And so, I mean, in a way, they turn into really good villains in the movie, because no one, I mean, watching the movie would probably really like them very much. Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And yeah, it seems like they are going to be involved in the next one, because one of those mini movies at the very end, it seems like, okay, they're creating some new machine to, I don't know, create more of their perfect beings or whatever it is. And I'm sure we'll see maybe in volume 3 how that comes together. One of the other themes that I thought was just so spot on in this movie was, again, back to Ego's planet. On the outside, it looks great, right? They're floating across a river, whatever, You know, these bubbles of rainbows, and there's fountains that are fish are swimming in the water, and it's all kind of moving around. It's incredibly beautiful. But that's the outer layer. That's the image, right? Again, back to this idea of a perfect image. But then what happens when Zoe's character, you know, they crash down into the caverns underneath the surface? Well, what do they find? They find dead bodies. It's all these skeletons of these beings. It turns out, you know, in the story, it's all Ego's children that they come back, and they're not good enough, so he has to basically use them for fuel or something weird like that. But what it really says is that the whole Ego world is built on death. That nothing can survive without something else dying, and that's what the Ego's world is, right? The Ego's world is predicated on death. Everything here dies. You know, nothing here can really survive without something else dying, or at least changing, or, you know, it's like it's baked into this world, and it's what we think of as pretty normal. But what we're coming to figure out as we're letting go of the ego is it's not normal, and it's not something that we should want, and it's not something we should really believe is the truth. So we're questioning and challenging these sort of fundamental ideas of the ego, which can be scary and can be exciting, almost like it was in this movie, as they were challenging the ego and going against the thought of what the ego represented. But just like in these happy movies, it's inevitable that we're going to prevail, right? So the thought of death actually is powerless against love. And in a way, that's what they demonstrated as all these characters work together to overcome the ego. They proved that togetherness always triumphs over separation and death and hate. And again, just a really beautiful message that ended on this sort of redemption note for Yondu's character, and the coming back together of all of Yondu's people that he was exiled from. Right, there was this feeling he was not good enough for them anymore, but then he was, you know, basically brought back into the fold, and they had this beautiful celebration of his life at the very end of the movie. It was really touching. And then in the middle of this, we go back to, again, I don't remember all the characters' names, but the guy who was calling the other girl ugly, you know, and then there's this touching moments happening, and he says, "Well, you really are beautiful on the inside." It's just like a great line.
I wanted to bring up another part where he was talking to her. You know, I think she was going to try and put ego to sleep, the big brain ego. And he's like, "It's okay. You don't have to believe in you because I believe in you." And then all of a sudden she had this support, and she believed in herself, and she could do it. And that's great. And then he's like, "Oh, I totally didn't think she could do it." but to see that, I see that in my life a lot. You know, as long as I'm there to believe in someone, it seems to work out a lot more. Even if I don't say anything, as far as somebody's saying something about a business they're starting, if I believe that they have something that could really go somewhere, it tends to start going somewhere. If it maybe it's just because it's a good business and it has nothing to do with me. But at the same time, when I don't believe in it and I don't have the support in it, I find that they tend to kind of fall off and just kind of not work out. And at the same time, if I'm questionable, it seems to be questionable too. And it's just interesting how it reflects my mind and in my experience, of course. And yeah, so finding that empathy and that ability to relate and support with, and using that, you know, it's a beautiful thing, and it is helpful. That's for sure.
Yeah, I really did like that character Drax. I think Drax is, you know, pretty much across the board, somebody who is really physically into this material world, because he loves conflict. He loves, you know, having these combative experiences. He sees them.
Do you have a penis? Oh, sorry.
Well, but he sees them from a level of you know, pure human experience. And so he's very much a person who enjoys being engaged in the material world. And he has no regrets. That's one of the things that comes up over and over again. Uh, he's a bit thick-headed, muddle-headed, and often, you know, misidentifies things, sees them from his own unique perspective. But he is a very, at the end of the day, he is somebody that even with all of these shortcomings, he is somebody that is true and somebody who you can depend on. And that was another part of the casting that I really appreciated, was the fact that there are these paradox characters floating through the storyline, but when everything is reduced down to that final level, they're always there for each other. They are always the ones who rise above the idea of the personal ego, and collectively they save the outcome. They save the universe from one disaster after another. So he is a major contributor to the movie, and you see him in the first movie, Guardians of the Galaxy 1, where at first you can't decide if he's a good guy or a bad guy. And finally you realize you don't need to label him either one. He's going to show up in whatever placement he needs to be to integrate into the story. And so I think that's something that helps us get beyond that tendency to have a judgment about a person that shows up in our life. Because a lot of times the people that we don't like, the people that we have had judgments against, are the ones who rescue us when things get really rough. And I really like his character a lot.
So I like the whole main character being the son of this ego guy, and how he can use the power, and how excited Ego was when he was able to make an energy ball. And I love that they started playing catch. It's so perfect. Long time since. And anyway, I find it interesting, and I suspect in the next movie that there's going to be an ability that he finds, especially when the blue character, as he's getting covered with rocks, he says, I don't fly the arrow with my mind, I fly it with my heart. But he was a little cut off. And the realization of that this power came from love. And even though the ego started the power going to his head, literally, I guess, and he was not respecting humanity and races and people, and it took this direction of death. I suspect in the next movie that he's going to find a way to find this power again, even though it essentially is said to be from the source of what ego was on the planet, and now he's just a human being. But really, it seems like, well, he would probably die off if he didn't have that. So I suspect that he's going to be able to find a way of directing it and using it with his opening his heart and finding this power, and recognizing that the eternal aspect of himself has this ability, that it had nothing to do with even this separate idea of an eternal being that's said to be his father, which I think is something in all of our lives, that the use of energy in the spiritual world and energy healing and stuff is a very good conduit to this, and a bridge to this awakening of the eternal perspective. However, of course, it's more than that. It's beyond that, but it is definitely helpful to go in such a direction. And I think that's going to be part of it there.
It makes sense, yeah. And the more you talk about that, the more excited I get for the new Star Wars movie that's coming out next month.
Yeah.
It obviously has all those themes too, right? Finding the power within, how we all have access to the Force, and
Yeah.
I can see, yeah, it definitely makes sense that something along those lines would play out in this next movie. So, yeah. Well, I know we're kind of coming up on the top of the hour here, so I'm going to give my little soundbite for the movie. I think Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is very entertaining. It's very fun. The characters are all interesting and complex and playful. They all have a good time together. And in the context of that really enjoyable movie, it delivers some really profound spiritual messages. And you don't have to be into spirituality or even really connect to these messages to enjoy it. But I think that because it has both elements, it really ranks as one of my all-time favorite movies. This was really good. I'm glad we reviewed it. And yeah, it was great talking about it today with you guys too.
Yeah, for me, it was definitely quite a surprise because, I enjoyed the first movie, but then when the second movie came along and, you get a quarter of the way into it and a character comes on board whose name is Ego, it's like, whoa, there is something big happening in this movie. So overall, I would give it a 10-star review. I think it's an amazing movie, very well thought out, beautifully put together. Even the animation parts of it are very lush, and so they give you a sense that you can project yourself into these different environments. The characters are all great, and the outcome is beyond just a good outcome or a happy outcome, even though there is the appearance of the loss of one of the primary roles, one of the primary players. The truth is that ultimately we're all validated in our work in undoing the illusion that we have created within the realm of the ego, and that we can be comfortable with it. We don't have to be feeling loss or sorrow or frustration or resistance. We can just play, like you said, Barret and Devan. We can just play at this world game that we have created and ultimately know that nobody is lost, that nothing is lost, and that truth and awakening will prevail.
Agreed. And yes, I definitely, overall, this is a very good movie, very enjoyable. More, even just that sense of comedy all throughout the movie. It's lighthearted, and yeah, wonderful graphics. I love how they do that space jumping thing where it's like going through a window, and it's amazing just what has been put into it. I highly recommend it. And if you take it with the eyes to see and the ears to hear the spiritual knowledge, that it does definitely have a lot of insights, and you can just find God speaking to you through it. So I find it very helpful. So overall, excellent movie.
Well, you got it. We got 3 thumbs up. You need to rush out and rent or buy a copy of the movie or find it in the theater if it's still available. In a couple of weeks, we'll be back with another movie review. And who knows, it may be something old, it may be something new, but ultimately, the bottom line is that there will be some kind of illuminated thought that we can gain from participating with the characters on that silver screen. And that's what this world really is the silver screen that we have created.
Mm-hmm.
Well, very beautiful. Good talking with you guys, and look forward to the next time we meet up and do this again.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
See you guys. Bye-bye.